Destiny's PvP experience in Year 1 stands as perhaps one of the most fundamentally broken competitive environments in modern FPS history. What made the environment so extraordinary back then wasn't just individual weapons being overpowered. It was an entire ecosystem of imbalance, where certain weapons and combinations created gameplay experiences that defied conventional FPS balance principles. What separated Destiny's PvP experience in Year 1 from other shooters at the time was the sheer magnitude of its imbalance. In Destiny, the gap between meta and non-meta weapons was so vast that it fundamentally altered the competitive landscape. And today, this is what I'll be talking about: the weapons that shaped Year 1 PvP and its meta. Some of these player builds, in conjunction with some of the most broken weapons I've seen in FPS, created an experience unlike anything else in FPS gaming. Experiences like 5-hour Iron Banner sessions just praying RNG would bless me with a shot package of Fellwinter's Lie, the countless failed trials cards with teammates rage quitting mid-match, having to scramble to get a new squad together at 1 AM, getting absolutely destroyed by the same meta weapons week after week was beyond frustrating, and in some weekends the lighthouse seemed completely out of reach. But man, when you finally did go flawless after getting stomped on by teams of thorns and last words for hours and hours on end, that feeling was something else. It made all those "I'm never playing this broken game again" moments worth it. Looking back, I know half of what I just said sounds like a foreign language if you weren't there, and honestly, that's part of what made Year 1 so special. In competitive modes like Trials of Osiris, running with the meta wasn't just recommended, it was expected. Since you could see loadouts of teammates and enemy teams, you could immediately assess if teams were coordinated and knowledgeable about the current meta. This created an interesting dynamic where your loadouts signaled your competitive knowledge before a shot was even fired. Before diving into specific weapons, it's crucial to understand that Destiny Year 1 PvP evolved through distinct meta phases, each dominated by different weapon types as players discovered their potential and as Bungie attempted to balance the unbalanceable. When Destiny first launched, high-impact auto rifles reigned supreme in the Crucible. Leading this dominance was the exotic Suros regime, which became the first true must-have PvP weapon. The auto rifle meta was characterized by constant damage output, forgiving aim requirements, and effectiveness across multiple engagement ranges. Players who didn't have the Suros regime at the time, like myself, were at a significant disadvantage, creating an early divide in the community. Around this time, it was around October, going into November of 2014. Following the auto rifle nerfs of October 2014, hand cannons rose to prominence, with 3 exotics dominating so completely at high-level play. Approximately 80% of primary kills came from the Thorn, the Last Word, and Hawkmoon. This period saw the most restrictive meta in Destiny's history, with competitive play essentially requiring one of these 3 weapons to succeed. Running parallel to the primary weapon meta was the evolution of special weapons. Starting with fusion rifles like Pocket Infinity, shifting to sniper rifles with final round exploits, and culminating in the shotgun revolution led by the Fellwinter's Lie. Special weapons progressed from situational tools to primary weapons in all but name, eventually defining encounters more than primary weapons themselves. As players mastered movement mechanics, special weapons became increasingly central to the meta. Maps developed clear shotgun and sniper lanes, with teams often designating specific players to control these areas. In 3v3 modes like Trials of Osiris, landing the first sniper pick often decided the round, making a competent sniper almost mandatory for success. It's now around May 2015, and this led to the introduction of Trials of Osiris, the pinnacle of the PvP mode in Destiny. This specific game mode concentrated the meta even further, with specific loadouts becoming practically mandatory. The high stakes of going flawless and achieving 9 wins with no losses meant players gravitated to the most effective weapons regardless of variety or personal preference. During this period, less than 20% of active players managed to reach the Lighthouse, which was the reward destination for flawless completion and a perfect 9-0 card, highlighting the increasingly competitive and restrictive nature of Destiny's PvP landscape. The first truly dominant weapon in Destiny's PvP landscape wasn't a hand cannon or a sniper rifle. It was the sleek white and red auto rifle known as the Suros regime. This exotic primary defined the first month of Destiny's Crucible with its perfect combination of stopping power, range, and stability. In its original form pre-nerf, it featured a high-impact mid-rate of fire archetype with a rate of fire of 88, 20 damage per critical hit, 16 to the body, and a theoretical time to kill of 0.9 seconds with all critical hits. Near perfect stability when aiming down sights, and the focus fire perk that slowed the fire rate but increased damage, as well as the health regeneration perk, Suros Remedy, that could activate when landing hits with the bottom half of the magazine. What made Suros truly broken in those early days was its versatility. Unlike later meta weapons that excelled in specific ranges, Suros dominated at virtually any distance. In close quarters, you could hit fire at full speed. At medium range, the focus fire mode turned it into a precision instrument, and even at long ranges, the stability allowed for consistent damage output that even could challenge scout and pulse rifle users. The weapon was so prevalent in PvP in those first few weeks of Crucible, it wasn't uncommon to face an entire team wielding it, especially among players who managed to get it as an early drop. The gun had a rhythmic mechanical firing pattern that became instantly recognizable as a warning signal to players who didn't have it. The community sarcastically nicknamed it Auto Win, and player complaints became so widespread and vocal that Bungie was forced to respawn with balance changes. In the October 2014 patch, Suros and auto rifles in general received their first nerf. Auto rifle damage reduced by 2% across the board, and Suros regime's specific effectiveness was reduced further. This was just the beginning of Bungie's troubled relationship with auto rifles, which would see multiple nerfs and buffs throughout Destiny's lifespan. By the end of year 1, Suros' regime had fallen from its throne, becoming a shell of its former self. The Raid Trophy turned PvP monster. No discussion of broken Destiny weapons can begin anywhere but with the Vex Methoclast. It wasn't just powerful, it was absolutely game-breaking. Obtained only from defeating Atheon on hard mode in Vault of Glass Raid, this fusion rifle that functioned like an auto rifle became the ultimate status symbol in Destiny's early days. At its peak before the nerf, the pre-patch Methoclast was capable of 56 damage per headshot, 41 damage per body, a firing rate of 390 rounds per minute, and a theoretical time to kill of about 0.43 seconds with headshots. It also had perfect stability, a 56 round magazine, and ridiculous range that could challenge scout rifles. In a game where most primary weapons had a time to kill of around 0.8 to 1 second, the Methoclast was essentially playing a different game. It could delete opponents before they could even react. The weapon was so broken that players would leave Crucible matches the moment they heard its distinctive firing sound. What made the Methoclast situation particularly controversial was its exclusivity. Only a small percentage of players had completed hard mode Vault of Glass in those early weeks, and among those, only a fraction had been lucky enough to have the Methoclast drop. This created a situation where an elite few had access to what was essentially a win button, while everyone else was left at a massive disadvantage. Bungie's response came 3 weeks after the raid's release, when they implemented one of the most significant nerfs in gaming history. The nerfs were a base damage reduction by 34%, precision damage multiplier reduced, as well as major changes to stability and a range reduction. Overnight, the weapon went from being the undisputed king of the Crucible to being arguably worse than many legendary auto rifles. The nerf was so severe it became a cautionary tale for how not to balance a game. It was one of those things that turned the raid's most coveted weapon to a decoration you'd have in your vault. The exotic hand cannon trinity. If there was one weapon type that defined Destiny Year 1 PvP more than any other, it was the exotic hand cannons. 3 weapons in particular: Thorn, The Last Word, and Hawkmoon, created what many players refer to as the Trinity. A trio so dominant that they accounted for roughly 80% of primary weapon kills in high-level Crucible play by mid-2015. No weapon in Destiny's history has been as polarizing as Thorn. Thorn, which is dubbed the Two-Tap Terror and the Green Death Merchant, could only be obtained through one of the game's most difficult exotic bounties. It was initially overlooked due to its 6-round magazine and challenging acquisition quest. However, after a buff in December 2014, it rose to become perhaps the most hated or beloved weapon in Crucible history, depending on which end of it you found yourself on. At its peak, Thorn offered a mid-impact archetype. The rate of fire was 22, and it was an 86 damage per critical hit and 57 per body shot. Mark of the Devourer poison effect also dealt 7 damage per tick for multiple ticks. The ability to kill with just 2 headshots, as the poison would just finish off opponents, was ridiculous and was a contributing factor to the love-hate relationship it had with the community. The psychological impact of Thorn was perhaps its most powerful aspect. Getting hit meant watching your health bar slowly tick down while a green glow enveloped your screen, often forcing you to retreat from engagements you might otherwise win. The weapon created a playstyle known as 2-tap and hide, where players would land 2 quick headshots before ducking behind cover, knowing the poison would secure the kill. This led to many clutch opportunities where a player could secure kills even after death, as the poison continued to damage their opponent. This strategy was especially effective in Trials of Osiris, which launched during Thorn's peak dominance. The elimination format rewarded cautious play, and Thorn allowed Guardians to inflict damage without remaining exposed. Thorn's dominance was so complete that it warped the entire meta around it. Players had to either use Thorn themselves or specifically counter it with weapons like Red Death, which could trigger health regeneration and negate the poison effect. Some players even developed specific close quarter countermeasure loadouts, such as the Last Word paired with a shotgun, to deny Thorn users their preferred engagement range. The weapon remained untouched until the Taken King expansion in September 2015, meaning it reigned supreme for nearly 9 months. While Thorn dominated medium to long range engagements, the Last Word was the undisputed king of close quarters combat. This exotic hand cannon, designed to evoke the feel of old western gunslingers, had a unique perk that would ultimately break the Crucible in many ways, which Bungie never intended. What made the Last Word particularly devastating was its versatility in close range combat. Good players would slide into engagements, firing from the hip and securing kills before their opponent could even aim down their sights. Players would combine this with the Blade Dancer's blink jump ability, and it created some of the most mobile and deadly Guardians in the Crucible. The Last Word was designated as a low-impact, high fire rate archetype, with a 32 rate of fire and 77 damage per critical hit when fired from the hip. It also had full auto firing capability, unique among hand cannons, and an unintended bug that caused bonus precision damage when firing from the hip, and an unlikely theoretical time to kill due to the bug of 0.26 seconds. It also had near perfect accuracy while airborne when hip firing. The Last Word required considerable skill to master. Its recoil pattern was erratic and its range was limited, and firing from the hip in fast-paced engagements demanded precision. But in the hands of a skilled player, its time to kill was unmatched by any primary weapon in the game. Like Thorn, the Last Word remained unchanged until September 2015, when Bungie finally addressed the unintended bonus damage from hip firing. By that point, it had already cemented its legacy as one of the most broken yet beloved weapons in Destiny's history. Completing the exotic hand cannon trinity was the Hawkmoon, a PlayStation exclusive that Xbox players could only hear horror stories about for an entire year. While not quite as universally reviled as Thorn or Last Word, Hawkmoon had something neither of those weapons could offer: the ability to kill with a single shot. The weapon's controversial nature stemmed from its random damage potential. Unlike Thorn or the Last Word, which had consistent, predictable damage output, Hawkmoon introduced RNG into gunfights. Players might survive 3 shots from the weapon, or they might be instantly killed by a lucky headshot that stacked multiple bonus damage rounds. This randomness made Hawkmoon simultaneously less dominant in high-level play, where consistency was valued, but more frustrating to play against in more casual Crucible matches. Hawkmoon's unique attributes included a mid-impact archetype. It had 86 damage per critical hit and 57 per body shot. What made it special was 3 lucky bullets per magazine, which was designated as the luck in the chamber and holding aces perks. The potential to stack all 3 lucky bullets on a single round. It dealt 223 damage, which was enough to one-shot anyone, regardless of armor. For hand cannons, it had excellent range and stability, and it had the highest aim assist of any hand cannon at 50. When Hawkmoon finally arrived on Xbox with the Taken King, it had already been nerfed, with Bungie preventing lucky bullets from stacking on the same round. The PlayStation exclusive and its year of dominance remains one of the most contentious aspects of early Destiny. Xbox players didn't even get the chance to experience the weapon in its original glory, only facing it in its weakened state after a year of hearing about its legendary power. In a meta dominated by hand cannons, one pulse rifle managed to carve out a niche for itself. This was the Red Death, While not inherently broken in the same way as the exotic hand cannons, I think it's worth a mention in this video because it became critically important as the most reliable counter to Thorn due to its unique perk. In a crucible dominated by Thorn, Red Death offered the only reliable way to survive the poison effect. Killing an opponent with Red Death would immediately trigger health regeneration, potentially saving you from the lingering damage over time from Thorn. Red Death was considered a high-impact pulse rifle archetype with a 66 rate of fire and potential for 2 burst kills with 6 critical hits, which was 34 damage per crit. It also had the unflinching perk to help counter Thorn's aim disruption and the crucial Red Death perk that triggered health regeneration on kills, which countered Thorn's poison. Its prominence in PvP demonstrated just how warped the Year 1 meta had become. A weapon was considered top tier not because of its own merits, but because it could counter the truly broken options. This weapon foreshadowed the pulse rifle meta that would become in Year 2, after hand cannons were nerfed later that year. Moving on to special weapons that define the meta, leading off the charge was the Fellwinter's Lie. Not all broken weapons in Year 1 were exotics or primaries. Perhaps the most infamous legendary weapon was Fellwinter's Lie, a shotgun introduced in the Iron Banner that redefined what a shotgun could do in Destiny. Fellwinter's Lie earned its sniper shotgun nickname due to its very high impact, 67 dealing 22 damage per pellet with 264 total damage, exceptional base range of 23, the highest in its class, and the ability to roll with shotgun package increasing its ADS accuracy, and the option to roll hammer forged for even more range. The ability to reach the range cap of 32 with the right perks. With the perfect roll, Fellwinter's Lie could one-shot guardians from distances that seemed impossible for a shotgun. The weapon became so prevalent that it forced players to adapt their entire playstyle. What made Fellwinter's Lie particularly problematic was that it could only be attained through a limited time event. Players who missed that specific Iron Banner week had to wait months for another chance, creating a clear advantage for those who had the weapon versus those who didn't. Bungie eventually nerfed shotguns as a whole, but Fellwinter's Lie remained a dominant force throughout most of Year 1. Its legacy continues to this day, with many players still considering it the standard by which all PvP shotguns are measured. Another legendary special weapon that broke the Crucible at the time was the Aphrodite's Spear and the final round perk it had. This Iron Banner exclusive sniper rifle could roll with a perk that dramatically increased damage on the last bullet in the magazine, enabling it to one-shot kill to the body. The broken nature of this combination and perk led to players firing all but one bullet at the start of the match, one-shot body shots that required minimal skill, and the ability to circumvent the intended skill gap of sniper rifles, while special ammo at the time was purely used for the final round of that weapon. This strategy was so prevalent that you could hear players around the map firing off rounds at the beginning of matches, preparing their one-shot body shot for the next engagement. What made this particularly frustrating was that there was no counterplay. If you turned a corner and someone had a final round ready, you would simply just die. With stats including a very high impact of 37 and dealing 181 damage per body shot normally, the final round perk pushed this damage well above the 200 health threshold of Guardians, allowing for instant kills with minimal skill required. Bungie eventually redesigned the final round perk to only apply to precision shots, effectively ending this strategy. But for several months, the Aphrodite's Spear with final round was one of the most frustrating weapons to face in the Crucible. The weapons we've covered so far were truly game-breaking and shaped Destiny 1's meta.
Heavy ammo available.
And with that, I'd like to add a note on heavy weapons. Unlike primary and special weapons, heavy weapons weren't particularly meta-defining in early Crucible, despite their power. While Gjallarhorn dominated PvE content and saw some use in PvP, many experienced players opted for legendary rocket launchers to free up their exotic slot for weapons like the Thorn or Last Word. For rocket launchers, players quickly discovered that all you needed was a launcher with maxed blast radius, high velocity, and grenades with horseshoe perks, which had proximity detonation. This simple formula made legendary launchers like the Ash Factory and Redagast Fury extremely effective without being fundamentally broken or game-defining. However, the Truth rocket launcher was the exception, with its physics-breaking tracking capabilities. But heavy ammo's limited availability in Crucible meant that these weapons, while powerful, didn't shape the meta to the same degree as primary and special weapons. Looking back at Destiny's multiplayer experience and the guns that shaped its meta, What stands out isn't just how broken these weapons were, it's how they made players feel. There was a genuine excitement to obtaining a Vex Methaclass or getting the perfect roll on a Matador 64 or Fellwinter's Lie. These weapons created memorable stories for all of us. Finally earning Thorn after that brutal bounty, getting 2-tapped by it the next day when you were 1 kill away from Flawless, and the whole raid team celebrating when someone finally got their Methaclass. The Year 1 meta, for all its flaws, created a unique gaming experience that many veterans look back on fondly. It wasn't balanced by any means, and it wasn't fair, but it was memorable, and that's all that really matters. It's what made Destiny PvP unique and so playable, during a time of great FPS shooters, and in a genre increasingly defined by careful balance and competitive integrity. There's something to be said for the Wild West days of early Destiny PvP. The chase for some of these weapons drove much of the game's engagement. Players endured countless raid runs, struggled through difficult quests, and grinded Iron Banner for hours, all for the chance to have the fun and perform well in Trials and Crucible with these weapons. It was definitely a special time playing PvP back then. Crucible and Trials especially were unique experiences that created memories that lasted far beyond the game's popularity. I really enjoyed looking back through this footage, making this video, and putting it all together. I hope to those who experienced Year 1 Destiny PvP firsthand can take something positive from this and relive some of those memories. Let me know in the comments section what other games I should cover in the future, and if you guys have any suggestions. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay safe, Guardians.